mind with this too is if we go to learn and we go down to the bottom, I believe. No, let's see, maybe it's at the, let's go to get it. I know that there, yeah. So this guy right here, his name is Anders. He's the father of C#. So he's the guy who gave us C# as it is today. He's the guy that basically created the .NET language. You know, we had C++, we had VB at the time. He said we need something better, and he created C#, and in turn, you know, VB.NET kind of came from that as well. And so the reason that's important is you can read a lot into the fact that Anders is now helping define TypeScript and helping to build TypeScript. So he sees the need of tooling, he sees the need of more language features and functionality in TypeScript. And so he's helping, and basically he's moved from the C# team over to the TypeScript team. So, you know, not trying to read too much into that, but what that tells me is that Microsoft obviously is very serious about JavaScript and TypeScript development for the future. So I think if you're thinking that you know, you don't need to learn TypeScript or JavaScript, you know, that's probably not the case. We're going to have to adapt and learn these new languages for cross-platform development. So anyways, this is where you can learn. This is also where you can get it. So the nice thing here is, again, there's a plugin for Visual Studio that makes this really simple, so we can get into that in a minute. But then there's also the Node.js package that you can install as well, so you can use TypeScript in Node. And then there's also other plugins as far as Sublime and some other, like this open source area here. There's, you know, or actually it's this other editors area here, where there's support for some of the other editors out there that people use to build their JavaScript. So TypeScriptling.org, and I'll have these resources in my slides at the end, but I just wanted to kind of show you where we're coming from with it. So let's get back to the basics. And I have the samples for the basics here just right in the slides to make it a little bit easier. So let's talk about a couple things. First of all, ambient declares. So if you think about JavaScript, it is dynamic. So there's not a compiler for JavaScript as it stands right now. So the point of these declares is that, okay, I know document is an object that I'm going to get from my HTML browser. I mean, basically it's the document, it's the actual HTML that I can get into. But my JavaScript doesn't know that, and so it doesn't know how to do IntelliSense and some of the things and figure out what objects are available to me from that particular document object that the browser is going to give me. So here I can declare that document, and then at that point it kind of knows that, okay, this is an object that I know about, and I'm going to go figure out some of the IntelliSense and give the developer a better experience dealing with that particular object. So that's one way you can kind of incorporate JavaScript that you already have, or if you're already using a JavaScript framework like jQuery or Knockout or any of those, you can bring those in and use those inside of TypeScript just as you can JavaScript. And the other key point is that TypeScript is JavaScript. So any JavaScript that you currently have, if you move that into a TypeScript file, it will work. It'll compile, it'll run just fine. So you could take all your JavaScript, move them all into TypeScript files, and then just basically add the TypeScript that you wanted, or where you need TypeScript, use it just in those cases, and still use all your JavaScript. So that's another important thing to realize. Now here's the type definitions. So this is interesting. You know, if you come from the C# world, you usually put the type of the variable before the variable. So you say, you know, string first name equals you know, Ben. In this case, because they didn't want to mess with the JavaScript syntax and make it look dramatically different than JavaScript, so what they've done is they've introduced this colon with the type behind the actual variable. So this right here is not actual JavaScript. The colon and the number is not JavaScript. That's the TypeScript, and that's how TypeScript knows your intent. That's how it knows that X and Y are numbers. So if somebody tries to put a string in there, I'm going to give you an error and tell you that that's not what it's supposed to be doing. So that's the type definitions, and we'll look at this here when we get into it and how that helps here in just a minute. Also, function signatures. So again, I can put the types in the actual function signature that I'm looking for, which is nice as well. So that now when I'm down here and I try to create, and I try to call vote, right? It knows that I'm expecting a string. So not only can it give me some IntelliSense and say, okay, you need a string and a function callback. It can tell me that in the IntelliSense, but also, again, if I try to pass a string in, it's going to know and it's going to flag me and give me a compilation error and tell me that I'm not calling that function correctly. So again, just a nice way for developers to get some feedback before they actually have to run the application. And we talked about some of the other things that, some of the other keywords that were introduced are around structure. So in this case, I can declare an interface, which is a friend, and I can say it's got a name and a favorite color. And notice we also have the nullable, the little question mark, which means that you don't have to give me a color if you don't want to. And then down here in my function, I can say, now I can start using friend. Since I define it as an interface, I can start using that as a type as well in my function calls or as I declare variables somewhere else. And then I can get IntelliSense, so I know that friend has a property .name on it, and I can get some IntelliSense that'll help me be more productive when developing. And we'll see this a little bit more once we get into the demo. Okay, classes are kind of the same thing. So here I've got class, which is a bank account. And notice also there's this keyword constructor, which is kind of, it's a C# concept, but there are constructors in JavaScript as well. It's just, again, it's not as intuitive as far as how to build a constructor for your objects in JavaScript. So in this case, I have a constructor, and it's expecting a number that's going to be balanced. And then I also have a function called deposit, which makes a deposit into my bank account. Now the interesting thing is down here, I can also have inheritance. So I can say that, okay, I've got a checking account which extends bank account, and so it also has a constructor that takes a balance. But then I also have an extra method on there called write check, which will deduct from my balance. So now not only do I have, so now I can start, again, using the solid object-oriented principles, I can start building my JavaScript similar to the way that I build my C# and make it object-oriented and code reuse and all the things that you try to do when you build good code. Now it's a lot simpler for me to do those types of things with TypeScript. Clicking the wrong button there. And then modules, if you're coming from a C# world, modules are basically namespaces. So this is a way for me to say, okay, I have this section of my application that does a certain piece of functionality. I'm going to encompass that in a module. And then the nice thing that modules do for you is they also introduce this export keyword, which allows me to have private things inside of my module. So in JavaScript, you can't do these types of things without, again, learning the patterns that are required to do these things. So this export is nice. So in this case, I can call this module, which is named M, and I can call the function F, but I cannot access that S variable because I did not export it. So S is a private variable encompassed inside there, and I don't want anyone to touch it unless they go through my functions to do so. So again, just a nice way to do some object-oriented stuff with TypeScript that is a little bit tricky when you're trying to do it with normal JavaScript. Okay, so that's pretty much all the slides that I have. So let's just start playing around here, and let me show you kind of how this works. So let's go over to my demo application that I have here. So how many people are familiar with the movie Office Space? I'm assuming everybody. Even if you're not a developer, you should watch that movie. It's hilarious. But in Office Space, there's one. The best part of Office Space is there's one part where he apparently didn't fill out his TPS cover sheet correctly, and so his boss, so his manager comes over and asks him why he didn't do it. Then his other boss comes over and asks him why he didn't do it. Then his other boss comes over. So like 3 or 4 people ask him, "Did you get the memo about the new TPS cover sheet?" So and the cool thing about Initech is that there is tons. So the company they work for is Initech, and there is tons of sample data and demo data out there for Initech. So if you're ever doing a demo and you need like an enterprise company, go search for Initech. There's daily news, there's financial reports, there's Twitter accounts about this fictional company called Initech, And then it's nice because you can, it's publicly available, so you can kind of pull some of that information into your application.